Hello, and welcome to my channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud. This is a little blue book. Oops. It just happens to be Little Blue Book number 171, and it is titled, Has Life Any Meaning? A debate between Frank Harris and Percy Ward. And this debate took place on April 11th, 1920, in Chicago, Illinois, at the auditorium. Let me look here. At the Kimball Hall in Chicago. This is part 3, and we left off on page 19, or at the top of page 20, I should say. And we begin with Percy Ward's second speech. My friend, the foeman, is a hopelessly incurable optimist. He literally wallows in cheerfulness. My friend asked me, if life is not worthwhile, why not end it? Well, as Clarence Darrow put it, there is nothing to make a pessimist commit suicide because he knows he is going to die anyway. For another reason, I would not dream of committing suicide because I am waiting for Mr. Frank Harris to publish his autobiography. How does Mr. Harris justify the ways of God to man? He tells us that out of the struggle for existence there comes progress. Sir Oliver Lodge argues that the painful progress of evolution will eventually result in a state of universal love. And Mr. W. H. Malik retorts, whatever be God's future, he cannot forget his past. When my delightfully optimistic antagonist points out the beauty and the order in nature, he forgets the cruel means by which the beauty and the order have been obtained. The fit survive, the unfit perish. Many are protected, few are selected. Many are projected, few are selected. Mr. Frank Harris is eloquent about the success, but dumb about the failures. He marks the hits, but overlooks the misses. In one sense, however, my friend does not overlook the misses. But seriously, Mr. Harris looks at the result, the survival of the fittest, but he overlooks the process. Natural selection. I would ask my friendly foreman, what of the countless myriads who have suffered and died while God or evolution has been working out this growth, this betterment, this progress? What about the myriads of human babies who have died before they reached the age of 1 year? What meaning was there to their life? Their epitaph might well be, if I was so quickly done for, what on earth was I begun for? If we are to credit God for the survival of the fittest, we ought to censure him for the unfitness of the non-surviving. Mr. Harris spoke about the Holy Spirit of man, delicious sarcasm. My friend says, think of what we have come from, and tells us of the apes and their bit of mother love and the supermen who will come. And yet among nations of men as among beasts of prey, there is the same bloody, meaningless strife. The law of combat holds sway over the human race as it does over the animal world. The appearance of man has made no difference to the battle of life. Why, man has erected the law of combat into the law of his own existence. Man has actually perfected the means by which the battle for life may be carried on. Behold, great states armed from head to toe, periodically shedding each other's blood in streams. The final end of all progress, of all human culture, is war. No wonder, Mark Twain said, when I get over on the other side, I shall use my influence to have the human race drowned again, and this time drowned for good. No emissions, no ark. Mr. Frank Harris suggests that we ourselves should become gods. If I were to pray, I would slightly change the prayer of Robert Browning and say, make no more Frank Harris's God, but elevate the race at once. My friend reminds me that there is radium in the sun. Well, what of it? It may prolong the life of of the sun a few million years, and thereby, alas, prolong the tragedy of human existence. Then Mr. Harris tells us that he, too, believes death is the end. Well, in that case, how can life have any meaning? It is the very fact of death that makes life absolutely meaningless. When all is said and done, the inevitable end of all the highest developments of the human spirit is death. Sooner or later, death will undo whatever we have done. To what end is cosmic evolution moving? All this life which rises step by step from Minoran to man is impotent effort. The road to nowhere. Imagine an artist devoting his entire life to the painting of a wonderful picture, and then, when his picture is completed, tearing it to ribbons. What could be the meaning of such a painter's behavior? What meaning can the longest life have in comparison with eternity? Man was non-existent forever in the past before his birth. He will be non-existent forever in the future after his death. Between these two eternities there is a moment of consciousness. As Schopenhauer puts it, life is a uselessly disturbing episode in the blessed repose of nothingness. We were dead millions and billions and trillions of years before we were born, and did not suffer the slightest inconvenience. And we shall be dead for millions and billions of trillions of years after our funeral. We should worry. We should worry. Now I want to conclude this speech with a question from an eminent man about whom Mr. Harris can tell us something. Arthur J. Balfour. In his Foundation of Belief, Mr. Balfour says, "Man, so far as natural science by itself is able to teach us, is no longer the final cause of the universe, the heaven-descended heir of all the ages. His very existence is an accident, his story a brief and transitory episode in the life of one of the meanest of the planets. Of the combination of causes which first converted a dead organic compound into the living progenitors of humanity, science indeed as yet knows nothing. It is enough that from such beginnings, famine, disease, and mutual slaughter, fit nurses of the future, lords of creation, have gradually evolved after infinite travail, a race with conscience enough to feel that it is vile, and intelligent enough to know that it is insignificant. We survey the past and see that its history is of blood and tears, of helpless blundering, of wild revolt, of stupid acquaintances, acquiescence, of empty aspirations. We sound the future and learn that after a period long compared with the individual life, but short indeed compared with the divisions of time open to our investigation, the energies of our system will decay, the glory of the sun will be dimmed, and the earth, tideless and inert, will no longer tolerate the race which for a moment disturbed its solitude. Man will go down into the pit, and all his thoughts will perish. The uneasy consciousness which, in this obscure corner, has for a long space broken the contented silence itself of the universe, will be at rest. Matter will know itself no longer. Imperishable monuments and immortal deeds, death itself and love stronger than death, will be as though they had never been. Nor will anything, that is, be better or worse for all that the labor, genius, devotion, and suffering of men have striven through countless generations to effect." Frank Harris's second speech. I notice they are all trying to confuse the issue, Mr. Ward particularly, and the chairman paid me compliments. I can also say that my first meeting with Percy Ward was a delightful and great experience to me. Strauss says in his Life of Jesus, "The noble man lives forever in all those who have received spiritual influence from him. I have had spiritual influence from Percy Ward, and therefore I owe him something more than courtesy. I owe him the gratitude that men should show to their benefactors in this vale of tears." To illustrate all this pessimism from the beginning, he wound up the whole thing with "we should worry." That is the result of his argument. That is the end of the whole of his pessimism. We should worry. He claims that is pessimism. The real pessimists, the Carlyles, the Schopenhauers, the Swifts, do not talk like that. He mentioned a gentleman that I love talking about, Arthur Balfour. I am going to tell you a story about Balfour. Lord Salisbury, his uncle, the head of the Conservative Party, was built like Sir Oliver Lodge. Nobody was ever as wise as Oliver Lodge looks. Lord Salisbury sent to get a bird's-eye view of a gentleman afterward called Major Kitchener. I was at the time editor of the Fortnightly Review, and supposed to have some sense. The moment I saw Kitchener, I said, "No one ever was so great a soldier as Kitchener looks." I will now go to Lord Salisbury again. It took the deaths of 3 or 4 people to bring him to the front, to give him his position. Before that, he had been a writer at the Saturday Review. He had a colonel position in England as the head of the Conservative Party. Arthur Balfour was his nephew, tall, thin, with a scholarly stoop. Even as a young man, Arthur Balfour was extremely interested in everything, with the most exquisite courtesy possible. One remembered that he had been in the throne room of Europe. No one ever had such courtly manners, and no one ever had a much colder heart. I was very eager to know about Arthur Balfour. I was young in London, and I met a great lady. I don't mind giving her name. She is dead now. The Dowager Lady Shrewsbury. Driving home from some dinner, she was kind enough to say she would drop me on the way. I said, "What about Arthur Balfour?" She said, "He never interested me, but tell me something about him. Is he in love with Lady T?" "Oh, I don't really know," I said. "Oh, please tell me about him. I want to know. Does Lady Salisbury like him?" "Oh," she said. "Oh, Lady Salisbury. I will tell you what she told me about him once. I said to her, 'Really, is he getting to the front of the House of Commons?' She said, 'Oh, my dear, I don't know really. He has no temperament. He is of no interest at all to us women. No one cares whether he is dead or alive. He hasn't got any more temperament than my poor old Bob." Bob was Lord Salisbury. Give me a moment, please. That, to me, was the explanation of Arthur Balfour's cynicism and pessimism. He hadn't any more temperament than my poor old Bob. Now, we know Swift had no temperament. Therefore, he was a bitter pessimist. We know Carlyle had no temperament. At least, so Mrs. Carlyle insisted. Therefore, he was a pessimist. I don't believe Mr. Ward is a pessimist at all. We should worry. He talks about the man who has done a picture, a great picture, and then, sooner or later, it vanishes and does not exist any more. Therefore, what was the use of painting it? But the joy in the work, the delight in feeling that he is among the great painters of the world, what a sacred pleasure. I have tried for the last 5 or 6 years to write stories, have published some in persons. I have an infallible judge, my wife. Like all people who create, I believe that every babe that comes, don't you know, is the finest ever. I am delighted with my newest story, and read it over and say to myself, "This is a wonder." And then, when the first delight is over, I give it to my wife and say, "Will you read this and see what you think of it?" The next day, or 2 or 3 hours afterwards, she comes in, puts it down, and says, "It is all right. Not among my best." Oh, no? And I know she is right. Always right. The other day, the fate of Vienna inspired me to wanting to write a story telling what Vienna had meant to me. It taught me music and gave me some episodes of love. And I sat down and wrote a story of a musician. When I had finished it, I gave it to my wife, asking, "I wonder what you think of it." She brought it back in a couple of hours, handed it to me, and I waited for the doom. At last she said, "I don't know whether it is your best or not, but I think it is among the first half dozen." I said, "Ah!" She went out of the room. I cried like a child for hours in sheer joy and thankfulness that at last I had been able to do it again. I had feared that the sharpening spirit of imagination had left me altogether for all time. 2 things in the world are worth much. The one is love, the other thinking a new thought, a new idea, a new story, or play, or... I will not even take up the 15 minutes completely. You remember the lines of Tennyson among his best. Nobody has written many good ones. Men, my brothers, Men, the workers, ever doing something new, that which they have done but earnest of the things that they shall do. Percy Ward's third speech. My optimistic opponent mentioned Thomas Carlyle. When it was reported of Margaret Fuller that she accepted the universe, Thomas Carlyle said, "By God, she's better." But Carlyle seemed to accept the universe with some misgivings. Looking up at the midnight stars, he once said, "A sad spectacle. If they be inhabited, what a scope for pain and folly, and if they be not inhabited, what a waste of space." We have no choice in the matter. Pessimists are needed to ballast the too buoyant optimist. The man who didn't know the gun was loaded was an optimist. He buried the man who was scared that the gun might go off, whether it was loaded or not, was a pessimist. He's still alive and kicking. The optimist lounges upon the deck of a crowded boat, smiling and content. The pessimist at his side smells smoke and starts to fidget. The optimist says, "Oh, it's your imagination, don't worry. It will turn out all right in the end." Nevertheless, the pessimist noses around till he discovers the fire, which is then quickly put out. When, on his return, he tells the optimist of it, the optimist exclaims triumphantly, "Why, didn't I tell you it would turn out all right in the end?" The exasperating part of the whole affair is that the optimist's optimism is justified, thanks to the pessimism of the pessimist. An optimist will saunter out on a cloudy morning, minus an umbrella, because he knows perfectly well that he can borrow one from a pessimist if it rains, and he generally can. The optimist goes daily through life wearing the smile that won't come off, safe in the knowledge that drunken men and cheerful idiots will be looked after somehow. To be a pessimist does not mean that one cannot work as hard, enjoy as deeply, and achieve as much as the optimist. The pessimist plays the game of life the best he can, without wasting time, thought, or energy in speculating as to whether the prize is plated or sterling. To the pessimist, the game and its playing are far better than the prize. The pessimist tries to make the best of the worst. He knows that happiness is the feeling we experience when we are too busy to be unhappy. Mr. Frank Harris told us in his first speech that even if we haven't eternal stomachs, that is no reason why we should not sit down to enjoy life's feast. That is my own attitude. Life may be worthwhile, even if it hasn't any meaning. A man spreads a banquet and invites his friends. They are gathered round the festive board and about to dine when the host says, "I'm not going to eat." The amazed guests inquire, "Why, don't you feel well?" The host replies, "I never felt better in my life." "Well," says the guest, "perhaps you don't care for the dishes." And the host answers, "This is my favorite menu." Maybe the guest suggests, "You don't like the company." The host declares, "These are my best friends." "What then is the matter?" the guest asks. Suppose the host were to explain, "I am not going to partake in this banquet unless I am absolutely certain that I shall have another banquet tomorrow just as good." You would call such a host a fool, and some of you would put before the word fool a strong biblical adjective. And so the man who refuses to make the best of this life because he is not sure of another is a fool. The pessimist agrees with Schopenhauer when he says, "In judging any man, we must always remember that he is really a being who ought never to have existed, a being who is atoning for the sin of his existence by all kinds of suffering and finally by death." That attitude, I think, makes one sympathetic with all humankind. In his first speech, Mr. Harris quoted from Goethe that the pessimist should keep his doubts to himself. Well, Mr. Harris does not practice what he preaches. George Bernard Shaw has said that a man should never practice what he preaches because he will bring his preaching into dispute. My friendly enemy is in a wonderful article on James Thomson, the greatest of pessimistic poets, writes of his greatest poem, The City of Dreadful Night. The building desolation and passionate despair of Thomson's poem took complete possession of my spirit. Verse after verse, once read, printed itself in my brain unforgettably. Ever since, they come back to me in dark hours, and I find myself using them as a bitter tonic. Take such a verse as this: the sense that every struggle brings defeat, because fate holds no prize to crown success, that all the oracles are dumb or cheat, because they have no secret to express, that none can perceive the vast black veil uncertain, because there is no light beyond the curtain, that all is vanity and nothingness. Such words sink deep into the heart as meteors into the earth dropped from some higher sphere. And now, in closing, I wish to say that it has given me infinite joy to meet and debate so distinguished a friendly foeman as Frank Harris, a man who has been and is a brave soldier in the liberation war of humanity, and whose rare and rich genius and sweet and sympathetic soul are among the all too few consolations of human life. Frank Harris's third speech. Just as Percy Ward has finished me off by declaring himself an optimist, we should worry. So I am going to declare myself a pessimist, just to give him a chance. He is continually asking me what meaning there is in life. There are many meanings in life. There is one meaning for the young man and another for the young girl. Though they are not the same, seldom even alike, I think of the two ends of an electric wire. One might be compared to the pessimist and the other to the optimist, one to the boy and the other to the girl. Put a full current on in a man and a woman, and the ends draw together within a few inches within a few inches. For a minute they sputter and splutter, getting hotter and hotter, and if you attach them, they fuse. So with the boy and the girl, and so with the optimist and the pessimist. Percy Ward told you a story. I don't see the point of it. I am going to tell you a story too. I'm afraid it is a naughty one, but it is absolutely from life, and that, it seems to me, redeems everything. A troop ship was coming back from Africa. One man on board had won the Victoria Cross. He had been severely wounded, and everybody was looking at this young man with a great deal of admiration. He paid particular attention, almost from the first day, to a very pretty girl, and the whole of the ship was talking of the admiration paid by the hero to the pretty girl. Then came very bad weather. The captain, it was he who told me the story, said it was one of the very worst storms he had ever been in. He began to debate whether he would have to run for shelter. He had never been in such weather, had lost 4 or 5 boats, a thing that seldom happens to a big passenger liner. On the second day, in what was almost the worst of the storm, the captain was on the bridge. He suddenly saw this Victoria Cross man poke his head up and ask, "Are we in any danger, Captain?" The captain was astonished to see this hero wondering about danger. He said, "There is always danger on the sea, but I don't think there is room for much fear." 23 hours later, there was almost a catastrophe. The rudder was carried off. The vessel pitched helplessly in the turmoil of the waters, and the captain was more than busy. Suddenly, at his feet on the bridge, he saw the white face of the Victoria Cross man. "Captain, is there any danger?" "Danger? Lots of it," said the captain, "but I don't see why you are bothering me at such a moment. Are you afraid?" "No, Captain. I only thought if the danger got really bad, I would have a kiss today, anyhow." The captain understood, then, his anxiety about the ship going down. He was going, by gad, to profit by the last 5 minutes. And that, my friends, is the end of Book 171, Has Life Any Meaning? A debate between Frank Harris and Percy Ward. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next Little Blue Book.